Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to our In Conversation series that we've been running at Sova. The aim of this series is to connect with some of our SMEs in the business, talk about the challenges and the regions that they're working in, and to sort of share a bit of expertise. I am really delighted today to be joined by my colleague Jonathan Rook, who heads up Sova in the Middle East. John, welcome.
Hi Claire, hi, good to be here.
And John, tell us, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself before we dive into the sort of bit more of an in-depth look at the Middle East. But tell us a bit about your career to date.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Jonathan Rook. I'm the Managing Director at Sova Middle East. We're into our third year of operation here in Dubai. We work across the GCC regions. It's not just in Dubai and the UAE. And we set up the office here 3 years ago, and really my remit at the moment is to really grow our presence in the Middle East and help our clients to digitize and innovate. In terms of my background, I actually started my career in the military as a psychologist in human factors. So after I finished university, I went to work there, lots of interesting projects with the military. And we were sort of looking at assessments was part of it, but some of it was looking at human-machine interface when you begin to think about sort of military platforms and things like that. So that was a really exciting start. And then I spent some time in London working with management consultancies. So I did that for 4 or 5 years before then moving over to occupational psychology. I became a chartered psychologist and decided to make that sort of lateral move across to a test publisher. And that's actually when I met I met yourself and Alan and the rest of the team back at Talent Q a few years ago now. So and then having sort of done that, I've worked in a couple of consulting roles as a psychologist, and then in 2017 I joined Sova, and then so I spent a year in the UK, and then a year later we got the green light to come and set up the office here. So that's sort of my potted history in terms of background.
Thank you. And maybe we'll revisit that, where you started your career in terms of the military and the interface with technology and things like that, because that's obviously, it's a big topic for us, right? So in terms of, Sova operates all over the world, actually, across Europe, Middle East, in Asia Pacific. I think we all share, obviously, a tricky couple of years, and can see the impact that COVID has had and what organisations are wrestling with. What's that look like for you in the Middle East, and what are the main challenges you think organisations are wrestling with?
Yeah, so I suppose sort of taking the sort of general trend here first, then I'll sort of talk about the impact that COVID had and sort of our response to it. But organisations here, similar to other organisations, what they're really trying to do is find the best talent. The companies that operate here, and that includes multinationals, they're not necessarily filling thousands and thousands of job vacancies. So it's about finding the best talent for a limited number of roles. And that's very much the main sort of challenge they've got from a talent perspective. But at the same time, you then throw into the mix this sort of global talent shortage, which in part is sort of something to do with the pandemic. But there is this kind of shortage of skills, the skills of the future that are required in roles. And so organizations here are grappling with that like they are everywhere, sort of thing. And so, yeah, the challenges are similar really to the global stage, but when they're trying to fill vacancies, they're not necessarily trying to place volume numbers of roles. We do see those sorts of projects in other parts of the GCC, like Saudi Arabia, because that's there's a steep sort of acceleration in terms of building their knowledge economy, building the talent to fill all these ambitious projects which they've got underway. But I'd say in the UAE, even with multinationals, they're very selective on the talent they want, because there's not necessarily lots of different vacancies. So even though the applications might actually be quite high. So they're the sort of main challenges. And then obviously with COVID, I mean, there was a huge amount of job losses here locally in the UAE. I read statistics somewhere that there was close to 1 million job losses, I think,
Wow.
which were direct results of COVID. And obviously with the population being what it is, which is not that big, I think it's about 7 million across the UAE and 2.5 million in Dubai. I mean, that's a huge impact. So there was a mass exodus of expatriates, and now organizations are wanting to rehire, but then rehiring selectively and making sure they're actually getting the right skills for their sort of the future business plans and the new sort of hybrid environment that we find ourselves in.
And in terms of, you mentioned there about sort of like future roles, how much are organisations sort of rethinking how work is done, or is that more anchored to upskilling workforces because there's a impact of technology, future skills, agility, things like that? So where's the balance in terms of future skills?
Yeah, so I think it's both things, actually, if I'm allowed to go with that. I mean, I think firstly, from a sort of government vision perspective, they're trying to shift the economy from a knowledge economy, from an oil-based economy more to a knowledge economy, right? So, and the UAE has been quite successful in doing that, by the way, because only a small percentage of the GDP is now directly from things like the traditional oil-based revenues. So the knowledge economy here in Dubai, at least, I mean, is thriving, and that's been successful. But other parts of the GCC, Saudi Arabia, potentially, they have a much bigger drive against that. So they're trying to attract and retain the best talent. And that sort of overarching sort of countrywide development is the main driver. But then there's also the driver which you mentioned about actually what are the skills of the future. So it's the sort of getting programmers with the right analytical skills, the right specific IT skills, getting employees who are creative, emotionally intelligent, analytical. And there's a big list of things, which a big sort of wish list from employers. So I think those two things are definitely both working in the region, and that is driving a lot of competition. I think sort of the war on talent, if you like. Or it's very competitive here in terms of what employees are looking for. And
talk to me a little bit about sort of like what types of projects are you doing with your clients? Is it sort of recruitment? Is it post-hire? What does that look like?
Yeah, so a real sort of range of projects. So we have obviously the projects which are seeking to assess people for selection into roles. And then organizations want to know who's the best fit, how can I make sense of all this talent data, and how can we do that efficiently, but also in a nice way where you're engaging candidates. So there's those sorts of projects, and they're sort of ongoing. There's a few of those. But then we're also working on sort of internal talent initiatives, development programs for identifying high potential, and those types of things. So we've got several clients we're working with to deliver those programs. And they're really nice programs to work on as well, because they're multifaceted. There's lots of different things we can do from a technology perspective. And then also, there are some in the region, there's nationalization programs. So we just worked on one recently, actually looking at how do we attract, graduates with the best, science, technology, engineering, and math skills into the companies here in the UAE. And we've been able to leverage some of our technology to help one of our clients do that. So yeah, it's just really sort of varied. We are beginning to see some big sort of invitations to tenders where organizations, even here in the UAE, having said at the beginning that there's not a sort of volume hiring requirement, actually that is coming back, as I said, either through new sort of future focused fourth industrial revolution organizations or organizations that are having to rehire, and they're expecting, obviously a high volume of candidates for roles, and therefore how can you use technology and assessment to create your sort of your ranked candidate list effectively.
Yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. And I would say that we definitely see that in other regions as well, that balance of what recruitment activity looks like. But there's often a disconnect, isn't there, between investment, strategy, time that gets put into an external recruitment program versus actually, well, what about the talent within the organization? How might we structure a development program? How do we do that initial diagnosis of talent? So I think there's real connections to be made, actually, even like how do we think about how we use that assessment data in recruitment to feed through into development. And I think that where organizations can make that jump and use technology to make that easier, there's a huge amount of value to be made. Where's the region in terms of, is assessment quite widely used? Is it from an adoption perspective, or are you having to educate a little bit more about the value of assessment or objective assessment?
Yeah, I think it does vary a little bit. A lot of organizations do have assessments in place, psychometrics or different sorts of assessments they've been using to help them with hiring or development. So on the one hand, there are clients that have some experience of it, but they might have been using something which is not necessarily fit for purpose,
right,
or it's a bit clunky, or it hasn't been that successful. So there's a sort of a bit of a sort of, I suppose, skepticism from some clients that you have to overcome with the, you know, the whole, if you want people to invest in assessment, what's going to be the return on investment? What value are they going to get from it directly? So there's sort of some companies do have it, but others are starting completely from scratch. They're starting from the basics, and we sort of say to them, let's get the basics in place. We might be putting in place some sort of, you know, some basic off-the-shelf psychometrics before we start talking about virtualizing assessment centers or, you know, doing any customization work. So yeah, I mean, what we try to do is sort of start with a sort of maturity assessment of where's your process currently, and how mature is that against what you could be doing, what do you have in place already, if anything. And then we sort of go in with our sort of recommendation on solution from there. And actually we've been offering during our sort of webinar series, we've been offering free assessment audits to our clients. So they can come to us and we'll take a look at the process at a high level and say, you know, this is probably where you are on the maturity curve. And I know you're doing that in the UK as well, but that's I think for the region it's important because people are kind of attracted to, you know, things like artificial intelligence and digitizing, virtualizing, but there's a sort of bit about, you know, let's not run before we can walk. So let's put in place the basics and then let's sort of upscale it from there, if you like.
I really like the approach you guys are taking with that, because I completely agree. There is, unless you've got those fundamentals in place, there's a little point kind of trying to really optimize it at the top end, or, you know, depending on what you're trying to do. And actually, that's one of the reasons we've created the Sova assessment community. Actually, we really appreciate people and teams are at different stages in terms of their knowledge of assessment, either from kind of like maybe quite seasoned people who purchase in sort of grad recruitment territory versus someone who may actually just be at the beginning, or they're trying to upskill hiring managers. So would really encourage anyone listening today is to, and we can share the link to that, is to check out our community platforms, because we've got advice and courses and guidance in there that will kind of, anyone from who sort of, what is assessment and why do you use it, through to actually, if we're trying to really digitalize your whole process, how do we kind of, you know, the intersection of science and technology to do that in an efficient way.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of kind of interest in the region in that sort of community and sort of creating that sort of, you know, talent professionals, HRDs, hiring managers, whoever it is, you know, sort of, we do sort of monthly, you know, knowledge sharing and webinars and that type of thing, which are going to be all available on demand. But that sort of building that community up, and we've seen a lot of interest in that, because I think, you know, clients here definitely want the latest thinking around, you know, around assessment, what we can do with analytics, what we can do with AI and machine learning, etc. And I think it's a really exciting time to be in the industry, because it's there's so much we can do, but we have to do it carefully and sensibly. You know, sort of walking before we can run type of thing. But,
completely agree. And in terms of your region, obviously that topic about the intersection of technology and how it can augment there's obviously a lot of debate around that, isn't there, in terms of like maybe some fear or lack of understanding about how we might use AI. And actually, as an industry, I think if you put yourself in the shoes of your client, it's quite a complicated market to get your head around, isn't it, in terms of what's out there, what should you go for, what's the good sort of right fit. And I guess as a business, as Sova, we're working through that too. And so what we would call our ethical and transparent use of machine learning, whether that's to help sort of refine and optimize scoring in the back end versus sentiment analysis of someone on a video interview and how you might analyze someone's expressions and therefore infer suitability. That's absolutely not where we see the evidence or science kind of going. But what's your sense what the appetite is like for kind of emerging technology?
I'd say it's really high. I mean, the region here is definitely forward thinking, because I mean, here in Dubai, we have some of the most innovative technology you can imagine. You know, it's a futuristic city here. You know, there's a monorail which connects the whole city. There's, you know, one of the largest airports in terms of throughput in the world. You know, the latest sort of fingerprint scanning, biometrics, etc. Just the interconnectivity of the place is astounding. You just have to look at some of the projects they've done in terms of buildings and the construction projects. I mean, it is, so I'd say the appetite is sort of right up there in terms of let's do something new, let's innovate, let's have the leading edge technology. And I think that permeates down, you know, through most organizations, because it's coming from the top leadership, and then it's permeating down. So I'd say like the appetite's really, really high. But yeah, I suppose it's when we get requests which are let's have everything. It's difficult to go from nothing to everything. So I mean, you know, that's sort of part of the challenge of, you know, some of the clients we work with, and it's just about having realistic expectations, particularly around AI, because like you say, there's lots of companies in the market who are offering AI type things, but actually is that ethical? Does it have precision? Is it predictive?
Exactly.
And not always. And you only have to look at, you know, like the Amazon CV screener project, which went badly wrong because it was using historical data from 10 years ago for males in the tech industry. And if there's bias inherent in that data, it's just the AI will just amplify it simply. And our CTO was on one of our webinars this morning and talking about that very point, which is the AI needs to be trained and managed. Otherwise, it can just it can actually make a small problem actually quite big. So, but yeah, really interesting. I'd say the appetite's right up there. So, like I say, it's an exciting region and exciting time.
That sounds really, and that's what we'll do is we'll signpost to our CTO talking through that webinar in the post here. Just to wrap up then, John, because I think it really sounds like you have a region that is kind of open-minded, eager to learn, eager to embrace new technology. Have you got any advice that you would give for an organization, either if they're sort of at the beginning of that process or they're thinking, you know, we've got scope for improvement? What would your sort of top advice be?
Yeah, I think just so considering your current maturity levels and then thinking about what that might mean for the scope of the project you want to do. And we've got lists of questions we can help provide clients with, which can help them think through that process. And even, you know, we can give organizations a score in terms of their maturity, but start with the maturity levels. Think about what are the future business needs, particularly, you know, what's the future strategy of the organization? Where's it trying to get to? What's the roadmap? And therefore, what does that mean for your people and the skills required? You know, there is a problem at the moment, a global talent shortage, because the economy is pivoted more quickly towards, you know, a different model of delivering business, delivering retail, online learning, banking, whatever it is. And so the traditional jobs aren't needed anymore. But specifically, what are the skills you're looking for? And that will vary by industry. Some companies will want the IT programmers, some companies will want creative minds who can work flexibly anywhere. So it's just thinking through what do you really want from your talent in the future, and then hiring against it.
Yeah.
Just thinking about how much do you want to virtualize the process, how much do you want to do face to face, and how much is your current process of a positive reflection of your brand. So just thinking about what you want to measure, how you want to measure it, and how it's going to sort of contribute to sort of business success. I think they're the sort of main questions that I would start with.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And I just think it does sound really exciting. And for anyone listening, I think we'll signpost to the session that John was talking about with Jarrett Hardy, who's our CTO, and that topic of kind of AI and assessment, and some do's and don'ts as it relates to that topic. And also, like, just really welcoming everybody onto our community. One of the things I've observed in certainly the last couple of years is just the willingness to sort of share experiences and foster that kind of peer-to-peer asking questions and learning. So the community platform, as much as it might help you reach out to Sova specifically, actually it's really designed to be an engagement platform that talent professionals all over the world, I think we have, it's over 250 at the moment, and it's growing all the time. So we feel really strongly that kind of best practice, that expertise should be shared. So that's kind of what the community is for. John, today, huge thank you for that. That was really, really valuable. It sounds like lots of exciting opportunities, and like you say, that kind of anchored to what the business needs, anchored to what you need from someone in the job. Those are certainly things people are thinking through all over the region, actually, and all over Sova with our customers. So I'm sure that will be useful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure. No, thank you, Claire.
Thanks, John.
Cheers.